I'm doing great here with you, Kirk.
We are very excited to have you once again. It's always a pleasure getting to chat with the official FP&A guy. When did you get that moniker? When did that officially come into effect? Was that like a recent, like couple years ago, or
No, it
was it
was
like in
probably
college?
no. It's much more recent than that. Probably about 5 years ago, I used it as a hashtag on LinkedIn. It just kind of stuck, and so I decided to name the
Wow.
business that, and away we went.
Do you remember a time when like somebody called you it and you're like, I guess that's my name now? Or was it more like a self-denoted moniker?
It was really a self. I like I'll be an interesting hashtag, kind of like a way of distinguishing myself. And then I had people refer to me on LinkedIn that way, and so I said I might as well
Okay.
lean into this. It stands out, and so I went with it.
Hey, good stuff. Well, either way, no matter what you're called, we're happy to have you and your phenomenal knowledge and wisdom here. Obviously, today we're talking about dashboards. It's a huge CFO dashboards masterclass, and we're really excited to get a lot of your knowledge here on this. For those of you that don't know, Paul, he is the founder of the FP&A Guy, a leading voice in the FP&A and CFO tech space, and has over a decade of financial experience across travel, banking, SaaS, and you've engaged with over 100 plus CFO tech companies who in the past 2 years alone. You're also the host of several popular FP&A podcasts and visitors of many more, and an advisor at One Capital. Now you are a seasoned trainer and a consultant for finance teams worldwide. Did I miss anything there, Paul?
If you did, it's not important. It
Beautiful.
sounded great to me.
And where are you calling out of today? We've got a couple listeners in from all over the world. How about you?
I'm coming from Utah, but I'd love to see where our listeners are coming from. And you're in New York, if I remember right.
That is correct. I am in New York today, the Big Apple itself. Definitely post in the chat, everybody, where you're calling in from. It's always nice to see that. And also, any questions you guys might have. We want to keep this as interactive as possible, so please check those in there. We'll be responding to those mainly at the end, but perhaps even throughout a little bit. I'm Kirk, the Director of Strategic Finance at Drivetrain. I have the pleasure of hosting Paul as we talk a little bit about CFO dashboarding. Today, what we plan to go through are these 3 points right here: the CFO dashboard suite and what goes into each, the framework for best presenting with examples, both practical and then literal examples that we've used in the past in the drivetrain format. And then, of course, we want to call out that we have deep dive consultations all the time for people that just want to learn more about modeling best practices. That could be cohort modeling, that could be total addressable market modeling, SaaS-based, non-SaaS-based. We've done a lot, and we're really interested in not only learning from the community, but also teaching the community a bit as well. So that's what we'll be chatting about. You can reach out to me in the chat here, and please definitely feel free to do so. Let's get into this with a little bit of a poll to start us off. Here, you can see we've got two questions. Where do you currently create slash manage your core finance dashboards? And secondly, what is your biggest challenge with creating dashboards? While you answer, I'm interested, Paul, where do you typically spend your time dashboarding? Not necessarily your favorite, because I won't make you comment on that, but where do you just find yourself dashboarding the most?
It depends on what company I was working for, right? What tool they were using. I've used Tableau, I've used Power BI, I've used Domo. I've done some stuff with FP&A platforms, not much there. Usually didn't have access. Obviously, I built some in Excel. So I've used a little bit
Sure.
of everything. Today, don't really need much in the way of dashboards as a single business. I think, we're seeing a lot in BI tools. And then
Mm.
obviously there's a lot that also go into platforms these days.
Definitely. Yeah, no doubt about it. Well, let's get into this right here. A few notes before we start. I understand, Paul, that you are a ginormous fan of this quote by Mark Cuban. Could you give me some context around this? What attracts you so much to this particular quote?
Yeah, there's a lot of quotes similar to this. This is one of many I like. And it's, in business, what's measured improves. There's another that says, when performance is measured, performance improves, right? If
Mm.
you run a race just for fun, I'm a runner, and I don't keep track of my time, I have nothing to beat next time. And, runners always like to kind of set a new PR or challenge themselves. Same in business. I mean, how many of us have a goal they're like, I want to meet? So really, you need to be able to measure and have those baselines in place if you really want to improve your results.
Makes a lot of sense. And I guess this leads nicely onto the second point, which is that we need to present to the right people. What do you mean by that when you say the right numbers to the right stakeholders?
Yeah, so right, I mean, there's three things there. First, it starts with measuring what can be impacted and what's important to the business. Not everything. We've all seen it. Dashboards try to boil the oceans. I'll tell some stories on that later. And then making sure you have the right people looking at them, those that can actually influence the numbers. And then as far as right time is, hey, they don't need to see the numbers a month after it happened. The numbers need to be timely enough that they can influence what's going on.
Beautiful. Yeah, and I guess that leads nicely into clarity here as well. Obviously, we want clear numbers that make sense. I guess this will feed nicely into your boiling the ocean comment that you just made before.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, right? We want to focus on what's important. We've all been there where you're like, I'm focusing on too many things. And sometimes one of my favorite quotes a boss gave me, he goes, strategy is about closing doors, saying you're going to have more opportunities and more things than you can do. That's true with dashboards. You have more data than somebody can really absorb and impact. So you need to know what things to put in the back or put in the report, not to focus on up front.
That's really good stuff. Well, let's carry that momentum with us and jump into 8 high level the secret CFO's R's of reporting. Now, you're a big fan of this. We're a big fan of this at Drivetrain as well. Could you give us a bit of an overview about what's happening on this page?
Yeah, so for those who are wondering, I learned today that the secret CFO is Tom Cruise. Let me know if you agree in the chat. But what I really like about this framework is it's simple, right? It's 8 R's, and it's all about doing things in the right way, the right time, the right format, right people. And so basically what we have here is it starts with getting those metrics right. If you don't select the right metrics, it doesn't matter if the rest are right. Then you got to have the data. What you measure it against, easy to change. Format, those are easy to change, but you do want to really think about format. How many of us have ever had data put in front of us and you're like, I have no idea what this person's talking about? I know I have. Yeah, exactly, right? Everybody will be raising their hand. And then again, we talked about it earlier, the right people, right medium. You don't want, people aren't going to look at reports if they have to go find them, and it's not easy. You want to ideally push it to the right people and alert them to what they need to know. And that goes with kind of right time and right frequency. So it's really just a simple framework to help guide building dashboards and reports, building metrics, measurements.
Yeah, definitely. We find, or at least I find myself a lot circling back on this every time I make a new report and just checking, right? Do I have the right metrics here for the stakeholders? Am I using the right data? And I'll just go through each one and check it off. And a lot of the times I realize I'm missing something. And then just that 1 or 2 items that I'm missing, I'll find the right chart to put in with the right data. And it really does change the sort of the vibe of the dashboard that I'm presenting. So when we think about, oh, sorry, go ahead.
Go back for one second.
Please.
I was going to give some practical advice, and it just kind of came to me as you were talking. Like, take this image, or CFO's one, load it to a chat GPT and ask it to give you a checklist or Claude or whatever. And just, as you're building dashboards, kind of ask yourself, because sometimes you don't think about everything. It's hard to remember. And so that's just an easy way that you could take something like this and make sure you're actually using it.
That is a great point. Yeah, and with the new image reader as well, it does make life a lot easier. Now,
Yes.
When we think about actionable dashboards, right, like we're talking about a couple of things here. The first of which is sort of metrics that matter. This goes to that first point you were mentioning, where we want to show the right people, the right stuff. Can you expand a bit about that? Like, what are these key metrics that can influence that tie back to the strategy?
Yeah, so a couple things I think of. One, a lot of companies will have OKRs or a few key goals or strategies. At the end of the day, there's ability to influence a lot of different things. And if you're not careful, different departments will be influencing things that sometimes conflict. So it's so important that you boil it down to, okay, what's the overall strategy and goals? How does this tie back to what we're trying to accomplish as a company? What our OKRs are? And do these metrics allow us to influence those things? Like if we have a goal as a company, let's take an example, to reduce churn. Let's say churn was 15% the last year, and we want it down to 10%. Then we're probably going to be looking closely at NPS scores. We're going to be looking at time on product. We're also going to be looking at churn, which is a lagging indicator, time on product, NPS scores. Those are all more of a leading indicator to help us know, hey, what do I need to do? How can I influence churn?
For sure. And on that NPS, that Net Promoter Score, what is that? And what's the best way for people to track that for those that might not have heard of it?
Yeah, so the best way to think of a Net Promoter Score is it's a simple method to see, are your customers promoters of your product or detractors? Generally, you do it on a 10-point scale. A 9 or 10 is a promoter. I believe it's an 8 or a 7 is neutral. And a 6 or below, they're considered a detractor. And so you basically just take all the promoters minus the detractors, you end up with a score. So you put it on a scale. And so the highest score you can have, if you had 100% of people giving you a 9 or 10, your promoter score would be 100. If you had 10 people, 9 gave you that, and 1 gave you a detraction, it would be an 80. The 90 minus, so it's 90% minus 10%. Any of the neutrals, basically are going to also lower your score. And so that's because of the math, because, if you have 1 neutral, then you only have 80% out of the 10. So now you have a Net Promoter Score of 70.
Gotcha. Yeah, that one we've seen a lot of customers really delve into because it is truly the best indicator of churn. And if you're giving quarterly, reports or quarterly surveys to your customers, and you're seeing this decrease in NPS, right? That's something concerning that you've got to address. One point from me on this metrics that matter, I've heard one person say that if the metric doesn't affect strategy or behavior, leave it out. What's the point of showing something that's not going to be, at least changeable or affected? And so that's one I always try to look at. Like, can we modify our strategy in the business based off of this metric? Or is this just, complete, fluff, essentially?
100% agree. Can they influence it? It's fine if it's in a report somewhere, and it may need to be reported, but that doesn't mean it should be in a dashboard where the goal is really to see the health of the business and be able to make decisions and influence what's going on.
For sure. So on this piece with comparisons itself, right? Obviously, we want to track the metrics that matter. We also want to track them over time. Why is it so important, and why is it so frequently left out?
Sometimes it's left out, especially smaller companies, just because they're right. They don't have a formal budget process. They're kind of flying by the seat of their pants. We're going to grow 10% over last year. Now, maybe we'll grow 5 or, whatever. And so having those comparisons, I always had to have the actuals, usually budget, latest forecast, and prior period, whether it's prior year, quarter, depending. You might be looking at all of these. You might be looking at month, quarter, year to date, and seeing how you're performing. And that makes it really easy to just get an idea, because yes, you have a target against the plan, but we all know sometimes plans for whatever reason are no longer achievable, or were never achievable to start with. We won't get into that. So it's important to be able to compare it to last year as well, saying, hey, how am I doing? Because that gives you a baseline. And then your forecast is your best, most recent guess, which allows you to say, are we at least hitting the forecast? Are we doing a good job there or not?
Super valuable. I'm actually seeing a lot of people now, not only just doing actuals versus budget or actual versus forecast, but budget versus forecast, right? We're seeing a lot of that in our reports where people just want to see, budget versus forecast, how accurate were we first attempt and then second attempt, which is quite nice.
Yeah,
and then with all this,
over years, to try to get an idea and say, is it a forecasting problem? Is it a market? Because generally, I would say most of the time, most companies don't hit their budget. They may hit what they report externally, which is usually lower, but that internal budget, often we fall a little bit short. And the question is, was it realistic expectations? What was it? Was it forecasting?
For sure. And across both of these, right, what would you recommend as sort of a cadence or frequency of reviewing, right? How often are we doing these?
It depends on what it is. I mean, financials, you need to do it as often as the business needs to see it to influence the numbers. There are things that are monthly or quarterly is fine. There are other things you may be looking at weekly or daily. And so I don't think there is, even sometimes real time, there is not a right frequency. It's really going to depend, like it says, on the purpose. Why are you doing it? How often do you need to know to be able to influence it? And, what do your partners want? So I think you have to be smart enough to look at that. And many times weekly is okay. Sometimes monthly. Don't assume everything needs to be real time and daily, because there's a high cost to doing that for everything.
Beautiful. No, that's really helpful. And yeah, I think definitely that's not a one fixed answer. It's more of like it's what's best for the company on the cadence there, based on bandwidth essentially. Now we've been very theoretical right now. We'll get a little bit more actionable here. I believe you have a bit of an exercise for us here, Paul. Here's kind of an overview. Before we jump into that exercise, anything here you want to note based off of what you kind of see from points 1 to 7?
Yeah, right. We've talked about the importance of your metrics and selecting them and tying them back to strategy. Once you do that, there's a lot to be said before we show examples of dashboards of thinking of how to design visuals and dashboards. I've designed some horrible ones over the years. So I love these quotes. It comes from Storytelling with Data, Cole, Nussbaumer, and Knaflack. Starting with think like a designer. I love to keep it simple. How many of us find it easier to be complex? I do. Use contrast effectively. Context is important. And then I'm a huge fan of ruthlessly reducing clutter. And what I'll say is, hey, if you don't need the bar lines, take them out. If you don't need the box around it, take it out. If you don't need a bunch of colors, get rid of them. Basically, if it's not adding to the story, it's just creating cognitive load. And that's how you should look at a dashboard. Every single element, is there a purpose to it? If not, take it out, because the reader is going to have to spend time looking at it. And if it doesn't add value, they shouldn't need to look at it. That's kind of how I think about it.
I like what you said there about if it's not adding value, then it's just adding to the cognitive load and just more stuff to process. And if there's more stuff to process, you can give less attention to each individual thing on that dashboard. So really choosing it. And like you said, right, like keeping it simple, that's actually more difficult than making it complex. Complex, you can just add things to the dashboard and it's just full. Keeping it simple requires you to actually analyze what are the most important parts of this. So far from being like the lazy move, keeping it simple is actually the more complex, difficult move, I found at least.
I agree. As I like to say, complex is easy, simple is hard.
Yeah, very well put. So are you ready to jump into this then, Paul? Show us what we're doing over here.
Let's go ahead and jump through this exercise. So feel free to put it in chat. And Kirk, I'm going to ask you, how many 8s are on the screen?
I cannot tell you. I'm going to ballpark it. We got 4 lines. We're going to average 4. You could say 16.
Way off. Okay, so he said 16. Now let's see the next example here. How many?
There we go. All right, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. We have 9.
All right, so that one took a couple seconds. And so let's now go to the third one.
Wow.
How much easier is that, right? So we went from a jumbled mess, which is often how the reports start, to, okay, let me just bold it. Now I've added a little bit of shading. Now let's go to the last one. Right? It becomes even easier. And so that's a kind of great example of just the value of color that I like to share when I'm teaching courses about visualization, is it hits home how easy it is if you don't do things right. And you'll notice on the last one, a simple example, we forgot to bold one. There's an area where it'd be even easier if the 8 in the middle was bolded, but you get the general idea.
And here's one thing you don't know about me, Paul. I'm actually pretty darn colorblind. And so the fact that this was so striking to me, even for someone that can barely see a color, this is very impressive at how striking it is and quick it is to identify where you're really drawing my attention. Definitely going to employ this.
Yeah, exactly. That's the idea. And you always need to be careful. Yes. Right. People are colorblind. You really relate to it. Having that. I'm sure you've seen charts and graphs are like, okay, this is hard to read. Could you change the colors or do something to make it clearer for me?
Yeah, normally I'm the one creating those hard to read charts. That's the problem.
I'm sure both of us have done our fair share. It's part of the learning process.
No doubt. So I'm interested in your thoughts here we've got the slide on what to look for when selecting a dashboarding tool. My big kind of high level things are focus on what you need, right? Like if you don't care about exporting, then our third point here is moot. If you only care about 3 charts, then getting a tool that has 90 charts doesn't add any value to you. So for me, a lot of it's based on features. What widgets are available? Do you have tables? Do you have bar charts, waterfalls, pies? Do you even need those? So for me, it's a feature-based thing, but I can't deny that there's also an aesthetic portion as well. I find it distracting when these charts are not lined up, maybe when they're not that aesthetically pleasing, when the colors are a little bit off. So there's definitely a feature piece at play, but then there's also an aesthetic piece at play. Here on the presentation tools piece, any comments or thoughts there?
Yeah, I mean, I think in general, when selecting a dashboard, it starts with what are my requirements? What are the things I have to have? And this, we're going to talk a lot about more presentation and the visuals. Obviously, data, security, all those things are going to matter as well, because here's what happens. We've all been there. If you don't do some requirements, you don't really think about what you need. You get a sales presentation of all the bells and whistles. You're like, oh, those are really cool. And half of them you may never use. Maybe you do, and that's great, but you don't know because you haven't done your homework. So for me, it starts there. I mean, the list, those are the type of things you want. And it's like you said, you have to ask yourself, how important are each of these? What's my, I can't live without? What's my, I would like to have, but I can live without? And what's doesn't really matter, or I don't need?
Gotcha. So that's a bit on the presentation side. How would you answer the same question, but on the data and analysis side? Sometimes that's the same tool, but sometimes they could be different. Any thoughts there?
Yeah, I mean, I think your analysis tool is really all about being able to get into the data and find the trends and patterns. A lot of great tools there. I know, Drivetrain allows you to dig in analysis. At the end of the day, no matter what tool you use, there's always going to be some of that taking it back to a spreadsheet and allowing some additional work to take place. So it's, hey, how does it integrate with the other things I'm doing? How does it, really allow me to get into my data and ask questions? How often is it updated? And yeah, sometimes they're different. Sometimes they're the same tool.
Gotcha. And then from a characteristic perspective there, you mentioned sort of updated. That kind of ties into this piece on AI, which is relatively new, but then automation, which isn't so new. What would people be looking out for there in terms of their tools, whether that's presentation or analysis?
I mean, I think for AI, you're starting to see more and more tools that they can help put the graphs together. And so that's really nice if there's some basic things. Can they do summaries? Can they help with the basics of the what for your variance commentary? What other things they can automate? You're trying to look for things that will make your life easier, like natural language. Is it really providing value, or is it there just to look cool? And there are cases where it can provide value, but there's a certain level where some I've seen, you're just like, yeah, I don't know that I'm really going to use that, but okay. So I think with AI and automations, it's asking yourself, what with my processes and the way I do things is going to make my life easier? And then looking and asking about those things.
Certainly. And across all of this, of course, is the piece about collaboration. Everyone knows what collaboration means, but they don't know what it looks like sort of when it's not there, right? They forget kind of those features that they missed. Do you have any horror stories there about collaboration, or just any feature callouts in general?
Yeah, I mean, when it comes to collaboration, that's something you really want. And ideally, can you comment on the different charts? Can you comment on the data elements? How easy is it to be linked out to other? Are there any warnings or different things it gives you? I think this is a very important area that sometimes is overlooked, because at the end of the day, if you have great presentation, you got your data, you got your AI, but the collaboration is really poor, often the tool doesn't get used, right? You want it to be easy to be able to tag out to someone, hey, this number doesn't look right, or why is this down, or what can we do about this, and get quick responses and make it easy to actually enable people to respond and, influence the numbers they're seeing.
Definitely. Yeah, I couldn't agree with that more. And that quick tag where you can just ask a quick question is huge. You mentioned us there at Drivetrain. I'll just quickly jump over to this. I think just to give you some insight into how we've gone about this. Can you see this executive overview here, Paul?
Yep, I see it.
Perfect. So a couple things that we've seen be largely successful in terms of these overall dashboarding and reports is the ability sort of in one click to change your timeline. Is it last quarter, current quarter, year till date, or just some overall timeline? And then how does those charts update in tandem? The reason I find that so valuable is a lot of the time you're going to want to archive these. And you may want to save down executive overview Q1, Q2. You want to have the exact same report, but lock in a specific timeline. And then when it comes to actually analyzing the data, we found that the two main ways people do it is either by aggregating the data or by bifurcating the data. Aggregation usually looks at like a time level, right? You'll click on the quarterly and it'll roll up. You'll click on yearly and it'll roll up. But then the bifurcation is really where people have a lot of the insights. And there's two ways we've gone about it. One is to just immediately go to the underlying data level. Here, I've just immediately gone to the lowest level of detail for May, for that total. Here is that total. And obviously now I can do any sort of sorting, descending, filtering. And then I may want to export that to Excel. That's all sort of well and good. But maybe I don't want to go to the deepest level immediately. Maybe I actually just want to sort of drill down into one dimension of that, maybe by region. And so now when I look into this, I've isolated for 1 month and seen this sort of regional breakout here. You should be able to do that multiple steps. Maybe I go by country now. And maybe now when I've looked at this, I see, okay, what are the contracts in India? And now I can just specifically see those contracts in India here. So that's a piece that we've seen super valuable. You'll notice up here that commenting box that we mentioned before, the ability to just quickly call people out and have it ping them in Slack, Teams, and email, whether that's at a chart level or at a cell level when you can leave these comments. We found that to be extremely a big ask from a lot of potential customers. And then obviously the ability to export a lot of these, right? If I come up here, I should be able to download it as a PDF, but we also see most people scheduling the sending of these reports. I want to tag a couple of people, and then once I do, I want to give them a subject, a message, and then set some sort of cadence. Maybe Monday, Wednesday, Friday, and every single day we're going to sort of wake up with this report. Now, as I've done this, we'll now all receive that report right there. So is that sort of what you meant by the drill down piece, the ability to comment? Is that kind of what you were calling out there?
Yeah, I mean, comment, especially, I think line item commenting is very helpful, and also having, kind of free form and some of those things you mentioned, drill down, right? In a lot of ways, what you showed is similar to what everybody's familiar with in kind of that pivot table, right? In that,
right.
hey, I can look at different things, rows and columns, bring in different dimensions. The easier that is, the easier it is to conduct analysis, like you're writing your monthly variance commentary and trying to find out why something happened, or answer a question, or the CFO going, wait, that doesn't look right for this country. I want to see the contracts, right? You can click in and then tag somebody and go, okay, why didn't we recognize, the Delta contract we were supposed to do this month, or whatever it might be.
Right. No, spot on, 100%. So let's jump on then and continue with this a little bit. Presenting the dashboard, sort of about this line of thinking when it comes to storytelling. I find that this is left out a lot, where people will just sort of jump in and to the report and just say what the numbers is on the screen. I heard this great quote. It said, never tell a number without a story and never tell a story without a number. I don't think that could be truer than for anybody than the CFO itself. And so when we're talking about this sort of framework, what do we mean by the sort of what and why, so what, and now what framework?
Yeah, so it comes from the 70s. I don't remember the name of the person who first came up with it, but the whole idea of what, so what, now what, right? Most of us are good, and we spend most of our time, unfortunately, in FP&A explaining the what. We missed by $200,000 in revenue, volume was down. Okay, that's all good and dandy, but so what? Why does that matter? So, so what happened? Give me the so what behind it, so I know what it's important. And then the most important thing people want in that story is now what? What are we doing? Storytelling, which, dashboards and storytelling are different, but dashboards can help tell the story, right? There are also storytelling tools, but I think the key in that now what is giving a recommendation. Storytelling in finance, particularly data storytelling, is all about how are you driving decisions? How are you giving calls to actions and recommendations? If all you're doing is presenting the data, you're really falling short. You're failing on that now what piece.
Sure. So if I was to, well, for me on this one, we've actually laid out a couple of more detailed views of this. Here, this is sort of like a double click into either the so what, now what pieces. And this is a kind of a step-by-step that I've found that I follow a lot, right? I might start by actually setting the agenda and providing access in advance. That could be access to the actual report. It could be access to the stakeholders that need to see the assumptions behind it. But either way, if I set the agenda in my head, it's like I've already started telling the story before I even started telling the story. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, 100% agree. I mean, right. One of the frameworks we use a lot when we're teaching just storytelling is ACE, my training
Okay.
partner. Audience, which is set the agenda, know who you're talking to, content, and then execution, right? Your voice, your body language, all those things matter when you're presenting. How many of us have attended a presentation where the content may be fascinating, but the presenter is as boring as they come, or the opposite? The material is boring, but the presenter is fabulous. It makes a huge difference.
Definitely. Definitely. Couldn't agree more. Our second one, the one that I've typically found valuable, I'm not sure your thoughts on this, but is to adopt that positive tone, focusing on solutions. If there's all this research coming out right now that those that focus on the negative things and have like a propensity to complain, their brain's actually shrinking, right? Our gray matter decreases, and the reverse is true. We can actually expand our gray matter in our brain by taking a positive tone. Overall, I think that just speaks to how we should approach the meeting. If I come in there, even if it's bad news, and I add to it, I don't think I'm not being a part of the solution at all. Whereas if I take that positive approach and say, hey, this is where we're at, gotta be realistic about it. But right here's at least our solution or our reaction to this kind of like downfall or this obstacle.
100% agree. The key is focusing on solutions, and keeping a positive. It's okay to say, look, the reality is we do not see a viable path to hit our numbers for the budget, but here's some things we can do to recoup X amount or to do this. I mean, you don't want to lie and say, if you're, 50% off and you're 9 months through the year, it's not like, oh yeah, we're all going to hit the numbers. Just go out and work harder. It's like, focus on realistic solutions and be a realist, but be an optimist with a positive tone. Because if you come in there negative, yes, it impacts everybody. We've all been in those meetings when it just turns into a gripe session and does nobody any good.
Definitely. And I think there you kind of covered this one too, like having that call to action and that recommendation, definitely so important. And that kind of feeds in with the positive tone solution. I think the other one that I've seen be super valuable is using data to back up your explanations. Speaking and kind of going around in circles, the wishy-washy classic sort of consultant speak that we've all heard of, it only gets you so far. And maybe that comes with point two, with being, a positive tone. But at the end of the day, the data is going to reign true. And so I found that if I make a claim, no problem. I just have to have some data behind it in order for it to be convincing. Would you say that's fair?
Yeah, I agree. You need to support what you're saying. The data alone is not enough. You need that narrative and story around it. There's a great book that talks about how when we're telling something, we need to replace their story with a new story. And that can include data and facts, but also the impact of emotion and things. If you want a great book that did shared a lot of psychological studies about this, Storytelling with Data is fabulous. Okay. About, balancing the data and the story and the facts of how data alone is not enough. But when you bring in the emotion, the stories in the right way with data, you have much higher levels of success.
Sure. This next one here, I've heard a lot of people can struggle with because they don't want to be the bearer of bad news. And sometimes telling it as it is, right? Even if it's not your fault, you can sometimes get the brunt, like kind of hurt the messenger kind of thing. And so this one I think is important as like it's kind of like an overarching rule I found. Like just tell it how it is. Most of the time it's not your fault. If there's an error in the model, sure, just own it and claim it. Try not to make it happen again. But most of the time it's, the revenue target hasn't been hit or a department overspent. It's not, you're just tracking it. It's not like your fault that you've done it. Any thoughts on that one?
100% agree. In finance, our job is to present the numbers, to own them with the business. Don't ever go, you missed your numbers. What did you do wrong? It's, hey, we missed our numbers. What happened this month? We saw an error here. It's really in maintaining that transparency. Also make sure you focus on we and that it's team ownership, not just you.
Definitely. Otherwise, it becomes the classic. Every time the numbers were exceeded, I exceeded them, and every time the numbers were missed, we missed them. Right? I hear you.
Yeah. You guys did it wrong, but I'm good.
Right.
Type of thing, right?
On those numbers themselves, here it actually ties in nicely with that because defining what those numbers are is so important. I've had several times with something like, CAC, cost to acquire customer. People have had in their mind what the CAC number should be, and they're not, two teams are disagreeing. One team might say CAC is sales and marketing over new customers from the current month, and both are current month. But some people are saying, well, actually, it's sales and marketing from 3 months ago that's feeding my new customers from a current month because we have a 90-day lead. A mismatch of the discussion like this can make it very confusing, right? So kind of outlining, I've always found having a slide just saying this is how we define these individual metrics and then these individual assumptions by region, by customer, by product, whatever that might be.
100%. I think with any dashboard now, having an explanation of what data sources are involved, how you define the metrics, ability to see formulas, all those things are critical so you can make sure you're on the same page. I mean, I guarantee if I ask you, Kirk, and if I ask our audience if they were, able to let us know, I bet all of them would say they've been in a meeting where somebody says, but my number's different. What methodology did you use? They don't align. And so you need to define that up front. I mean, I still remember the conversation when I had a role where it was the CFO, the CRO, and a few other people were on the call where we were trying to all align with what a booking was.
Okay.
And there were different ideas. I'm like, okay, fundamentally, we got to start there. Then we'll work on everything else. But if we can't agree to what a booking is, it doesn't matter what we do on the reporting or the dashboard.
And especially in the SaaS world where there is no GAAP SaaS metrics kind of certification or rule book, right?
Yep.
You get more of that. And then, of course, lastly, like having comparability across all periods here. The metrics that we want to track, that we have defined, that we're transparent on, that we have a positive attitude towards and are solving for, let's track them over time. Otherwise, sort of what's the point? There's no reference point unless we've done this over time and can actually see growth or decline.
Yeah, and adding one thing, right? Ensure prior period comparability is don't be afraid to put in the notes if there's big one-time items to just, tag them and call them out. Because we've all been there, right? COVID. How many you had to report the year after COVID? And it was like either way down or way up, depending on your business. I mean, almost nobody was flat. And so, being able to put that in can be really helpful and prevent a lot of questions if you're able to provide some of that commentary.
Definitely. And this last one here is a new one that I've recently started adding in. I, like you probably, Paul, am a huge user of all tools AI. I've really loved it. But there is definitely something to be said about sometimes the quality of the answers in the data analysis. I've asked it to merge certain documents and it misses line items, it misses decimals and these sorts of things from PDFs and whatnot. So double checking that, especially if you're becoming a big AI user, which I wholeheartedly support, but with the caution of, there are sort of data hallucinations, as they're so called, and those will sometimes give you the wrong answer, and you just got to keep those in mind.
Yeah, 100% agree. It's like an intern, right? You would never give your boss the work without checking the intern's work first before it went to the boss. Same is true of AI. You need to check the work.
I love that concept. AI is the intern, no doubt about it. So on the other side of this, right, mistakes, the killer mistakes that we typically have, right? I know you have a lot to say about this one. What are your thoughts on this?
Oh, too much data, not enough context. I think that's been one of my weaknesses. I'm a very detailed person. I love the data. And I still remember, I'll tell the story. And this gets to the importance of presenting and being clear. And I'll be short. I spent 6 months on a project aligned with all my leadership, multiple people, going in to present to the global CFO. We get in there, 10 minutes in, he's like, this is a terrible idea. Why would do this? And I'm just flabbergasted. Everybody signed off. He calls in the general manager, talks to him for about 5 minutes, and ends up signing off on it, and the meeting ends. And we're thinking, what just happened? And I asked my boss, and I still remember his exact words. He goes, Paul, your analysis was brilliant. Your presentation lacked. I forgot to bring him along and really help him understand the context, because I had spent so much time with the data that I just focused on, what I thought he needed to know versus really giving the full story.
Interesting. That's very good to know that the story can detract from the actual good data that you have there. So a couple of these next three are somewhat aligned with that. No focal point or takeaway, that's the negative of that that other piece that we were talking about, which is like have a takeaway and let it be positively aligned to a solution. The misaligned KPIs with business goals speaks to the lack of showing the right stakeholders. And then the over design slash under explanation also ties in with that piece as well. Any thoughts on these three?
Yeah, I mean, I'll just say the misaligned KPIs. It's not even so much misaligned. I think the key thing is, are they actionable? Are they leading indicators? I've seen times where the entire dashboard is nothing but lagging. And if the goal is to present financials, okay, fine. Those are by nature lagging. But if the goal is to give a dashboard that people can influence and make decisions off, you're going to need several leading indicators.
Got it. Yeah. And then the next three, by that same token, are somewhat linked here. Changing the tracking metrics often, not capturing the why behind the number changes, and then avoiding complex visualizations, or in this case, including them, which would be the mistake. And then I think, and this AI piece, we can also check in there as well for time's sake. Thoughts on this one, and especially that changing the metrics tracking often.
Yeah, I mean, I still remember being in a meeting where our boss wanted to come up with metrics, and I think we ended up like 40 or 50 on the list. And I'm sure, every meeting wanting to change something, and it makes it really hard to focus. So, you don't change your strategy and your goals every month, or if you do, you're probably not very successful. You usually set them for a year, revisit them once or twice, and make some adjustments as things dictate. The same should be true with your metric. You need to give enough time for people to influence them. And if you chose them and you chose them for the right reason, then why are you changing them?
Definitely. Well, with all this theory intact, I'd love to jump over and talk about sort of this idea of the essential CFO dashboard suite. Now, here we've outlined, and we've spoken before about this, about a couple of core CFO dashboard items. Any individual ones that you would call out or prioritize as most important? Or would you say all of these are something that the general CFO should have in their CFO dashboard?
Yeah, I mean, I think these cover the main things. I think, there's two sides to it, right? There's obviously the financial. The CFO needs to be keeping an eye on that and understanding cash flow and all those key things. And then there's the operational. So you've covered that. Rather, sales and marketing are critical to pretty much every business. Expense analysis, operational metrics. So I really think this covers it. And then, you have your vertical specific, and that particularly for the leaders and also for the CFO when they need to have discussions with certain departments or FP&A leads or whoever it may be.
Definitely. Now let me jump back into Drivetrain really quickly and just show a couple of the ones that we've seen be most successful here from that perspective of those items that we just showed on sort of the essential suite of tools. Here, the 13-week cash flow has by far been the most important dashboard that we've seen recently,
Sure.
just mainly due to liquidity issues. And then also just the simplicity. Excel does not do a great job of capturing items like this, either from an actuals or forecast perspective, the variance between the two, and then just essentially being able to sort of drill into that like we were showing before. That piece has been notoriously difficult in Excel. We found that a tool can do it a little bit easier. And then even if you want to drill into the actual calculations behind it as well, not only tracking the formula, but the numbers therewith. And then similar to your point before, a bit of ease with doing some budget versus actuals, whether that's drilling into it, maybe at the customer name and doing your own analysis, or leveraging a little bit of AI to actually answer that question for you. Here's something we've recently rolled out and will continue to roll out as time goes on. But as I'm doing my own analysis, right, AI is going to give me a little bit of an option. I can refine this, shorten or elaborate it, and then just add it to my report. And then the goal here is that now, the time it would have taken me to typically do this, I can now do it myself with AI, add in any sort of, bulleting I want and these sorts of things here. And then, of course, you're going to want to either go deeper into the data, go to the customer level, go to the department level, these sorts of things, or not. This one here is a special use case, especially with the scheduling of the sending in reports. We typically see these sent out daily. On the P&L side, right, we typically see something that looks something along the lines of this. You're not only going to have your tabular data that you'll be able to drill into, but then all of the various charts that call out the high-level items that you want to look at over any given timeline. So something like this, again, super important, but what's valuable in here isn't the charts, you can make those anywhere. It's the ability to actually show the calculations on them, comment on them, click into the data and see it, both at a headcount and a P&L level. Headcount is another one that is notoriously difficult in Excel, just because adding lines, subtracting lines, start dates and end dates, promotions of certain things, whereas a tool is designed to do something like that. So whether you want to drill down into these like by individual department and whatnot, just see that headcount movement over time, that's where you're really going to get a lot of those answers. And so I'll pause there, Paul. Any questions on that, or any thoughts or additions that you might have to that sort of suite of dashboards?
No, I mean, I think you covered it pretty well. The one thing I'll add is the dashboard's going to look different for every business.
Right.
You know, like let's take a 3-statement, for example. You know, American Express isn't doing a 3-statement in traditional sense, or a Google or an Amazon. They may be looking at P&L and a couple balance sheet. So keep in mind what we share is a general example. Every business is going to be unique, and we'll talk about that. I've seen some questions come in. You got to decide what is most important and refine that.
Awesome. Yeah, really looking forward to getting those questions. Before we do, let's ask a question again to the group. First poll question that we have here: would you like to explore a demo of Drivetrains? Just given what we've shown before, if you're interested, let us know. We'd love to set up a call with you guys. And did you find this webinar a good use of your time? We're coming to the end here, but we're always trying to improve this. So if you have any thoughts on this, definitely reach out and show us a little bit more. In terms of Drivetrain itself, here you can see kind of a high-level overview of a couple of our customers. We are currently the highest rated FP&A tool on G2, and you can see a bit of feedback there from of our customers there. Again, we'd love to show you a little bit more about what's actually happening in Drivetrain from a consolidation of data perspective, the modeling side, which very much will replicate Excel if you're a big Excel user. I personally am a big Excel user. And then on the reporting side, which is what we're sort of going over today. So up next, helpful information and resources, right? This is an important piece that we're always providing. So we would love to provide these to you either from our website, or if you reach out to us, you're going to see a lot of these. This is what I was speaking to before, where we really want to have these conversations about what is the right way to model. And like you mentioned, Paul, that changes from company to company. Sometimes an indirect cash flow is the best way to track your cash. Sometimes it's a direct cash flow. Sometimes you don't even know what the difference is. Either way, we want to have those conversations with you guys and provide those materials for you. And so let's now jump into this Q&A here. Paul, any questions that you're seeing that are piquing your interest over here on the chat so far?
Yeah, there's a few questions. There's one in particular. Let me see if I can find it again. How do you decide on the balance between leading and lagging metrics for sales and revenue dashboards? So I think, and I'd love to get your thoughts, but for me, it starts with what are the metrics that they can influence? And so always starts with leading, but then they'll also need the lagging, the financial and other things, so they can understand performance and put it all in context. So I do think you need to make sure you start with the leading and what are the things they can influence that they know that can make a difference. Then those other lagging financial and other metrics that give them the complete picture and help them understand not only what's going on right now, but how am I reporting in general? And the question you always have to ask yourself is what's most important? What do they need to see to make their decisions? It could be only 1 or 2 lagging indicators. It could be all leading it. You know, generally you're going to have at least a couple lagging because you're probably going to show what was the actual P&L amount in addition to whatever they booked and what they billed and all the, you know, differences you get between accounting and sales.
Got it. Yeah, I think I would do a disservice if I tried to add to that. That was beautiful. Here I've got another one from Kyle. It says, what strategies would you recommend to generate engagement in your dashboards? My senior leadership team champions data based on decision making, but I struggle to get their attention.
Yeah, so I think one thing that's great is give them an email and use this principle. I was taught to me and it stuck with me all career. It's called BLUFF. Bottom line up front. Give them what they need to know. Tell them, you know, if there's any recommendations or anything. Then if you want to add detail, put the graph, do it below. I remember somebody saying they were sending out monthly reports in Excel file, and they were basically just sending it out, and nobody ever looked at it. And a friend of mine told him, it's like, well, hey, give a great kind of summary, get to the bottom line up front. Let's really craft that email. So it takes them a minute or two. So it's quick. It's actionable and let's see what happens. Then if he didn't send out the report, people started asking for it. So ask yourself, are you just delivering data, or is there a story, an action, a recommendation, and a summary that quickly allows the people to act on it? If not, you're probably going to continue to see very little use.
Yeah, I love that one. That's a good terminology for it as well, bluff. The other one that I've seen work really well is whatever you get questions on, that's likely the part they're most interested in. So if they ever ask a question or lean into something, I was doing this report on a weekly basis for one firm, and it was, over week, it was the same for me and when I took it over. And I found that they were very much not interested, but on these 2 or 3 slides, they loved it. So I made the presentation more about those slides, more detailed, double clicking into them. And it became it definitely became my favorite meeting of the week. I think it increased in value for them too. So lean into what they're interested in if you want them to be interested, is what I'd say. Another one here for you, Paul, from JK. What are the caveats between leaving out low impact KPI items for dashboarding? Checks all the key boxes like these. Anything else, actionability, ownership, benchmarks, forecasting, relevance, controllability, and strategic alignment, how would you rank them in terms of importance in general? Okay, I guess so. On the prioritization of features of dashboards, is there a ranking, or are they all important equally?
Yeah, so they're definitely not all important the same. I mean, it never is, right? If I have a list of things, there's always some things that are more and less important. So where I would start in ranking them, I think most important is things like, okay, first, is it actionable? If this is a report you want people to action on, if that's the purpose of the dashboard, and you're putting something that is not actionable in it, then that's something I would stick in the back, right? The appendix, or put on that second dashboard or whatever. Second is, do you have clear ownership? If nobody owns the data you're presenting, even if it's actionable, maybe it needs to be presented, but you need to fix the ownership problem as well. And you need to bring that up. As far as benchmarks, I think that's just a standard easy. You should be able to compare it to a forecast or a budget or last year. If you can't, that's okay. But I think benchmarks, I don't rank as really high. I rank as just something you should automatically include unless there's a reason you can't. And then forecasting relevance. I mean, many of these things are business things. I don't know that. I'm not sure how to answer that one itself. Strategic alignment, you should start there, because if there's no tie back to strategy, to company goals, to what you're doing, what your mission is, all those type of things in some way, and it may be a loose tie back, but there isn't. If it's completely unrelated, then it should be considered low impact.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. So here I see another one. I think this is more of a Drivetrain question. Can I create views for different departments or roles on Drivetrain? Can I control the visibility of this data? 100%. I think this is more to do with role-based access controls, but I'll answer it in 2 ways. So if you go into like a headcount page or a vendor model page, you don't want everybody seeing everybody's salary headcount. You can actually control that down to the line item level and set basically role by department or role by cost center, role by region. And that's very personalized as well. One thing that we've released, which is really cool as well, is you can view, if you're an admin, you can view the tool as if you're XYZ person that doesn't have admin access. So I can then, view as Paul, who is a temporary user on the tool, and see what he's seeing, just to check that I've set it up properly. On the other side of things,
you gave me access to all the salaries, Kirk. You're in trouble.
Well, whoops. Yeah, no, I'm not going to live at Drivetrain for long then. And then on the second side, maybe for the P&L, you're going to want to filter by entity, filter by currency. That also changes the visibility, not so much from a permission basis, but more from a visibility basis. And 80% of our customers are multi-entity, 70% of those are multi-currency. So you're going to want to basically click into that and show different slices, whether that's intercompany transactions, intercompany eliminations, or just a mix and match of various different entities. So the answer to that is a resounding yes. If possible, can we please discuss a bit about how we can best analyze Cohort? It is used across business. Business/industry. That's from Stephanie here. Do you have a strong opinion on that, Paul? I can also show some stuff in Drivetrain.
Yeah, I mean, if you want to show something there, but what I will say is cohorts are critical, and You need to understand what distinguishes your cohorts. A lot of times you'll just see it presented by date, and that can be fine. But if that's not really relevant and there isn't a difference, then should cohorts be by customer size or geography? So the first thing is you need to dig in and understand the data well enough to say what differentiates one cohort from another. Then you want to be able to show them, because at the end of the day, people want to see the cohorts to understand how can I influence whether cohorts doing bad or cohorts doing good going forward. So you need to make sure you define the cohorts in such a way that supports that and allows the business to make decisions to improve whatever the cohort numbers are you're looking at. And that's going to vary, whether it's a waterfall, revenue, customer churn, right? There's all kinds of different cohorts.
No doubt about it. Yeah, I've done a lot of cohort modeling in my past, and the cohort itself can be quite difficult if you know Excel. Here, we've done our best to simplify it in Drivetrain. There's two main things you need for a cohort. First is what we call the horizontal, and that's these new cohorts that will start up every month. Normally, that's somewhat informed by the historicals, but it's a manual judgment. The second piece you need is a retention curve. How are these cohorts behaving after they are inducted? Right. And so here you should be able to sort of like change your beginning cohort months, however you want to do that. And that will have a knock-on effect to their respective months. But then you may, if I was to increase this to like 200%, now every second month should restart and it will be, you know, double, which is what we're seeing here. Now, this is powerful because now, like, this is the customer basis of cohort. But if I was to add something in like price, right, let me bring this up here with the rest of the assumptions, and let's just make that $15 across the board. Now I can take this entire cohort that I've created. I can duplicate that line item, and I might say something like this, you know, revenue. And then now in this case, I'm going to take this, which is a duplicate of this line, but now I'm going to take my price, which I just made, multiply that by my cohort months, which is this right here, and click that through. Now this will multiply through each of the individual customer line items to give me this. Now, of course, I'm going to set my own currency here for whatever makes sense for me. Maybe Ethereum, because it's pretty expensive right now. And now I've got sort of this price multiplied by my cohort months to give me this cohort. You'll know that typically the formula is like, if this month is greater than this month, then 0. Otherwise, if they equal, then set this number here. Otherwise, take a look at the retention curve. Here, we've simplified it to a simple multiplication of the two. And that's some back-end Drivetrain stuff that we've done just to make cohort modeling that much easier. And a lot of our SaaS customers will do something like this.
Definitely a lot easier than Excel. Try maintaining a traveler's check spend down cohorts by year for 40 years in every single product where you had to forecast it all the way out. That was the worst model I ever had to manage as far as cohort and trying to figure it out.
You know, I think I'm good. I don't think I'll give that a go. I think I'll leave that to you, Paul.
All in Excel, I might add. So.
Brutal. All right. Any other questions there, Paul, that you're seeing that jump out at you? Here I've got one actually. How do you avoid decision paralysis when the data says one thing, but your gut or leadership intuition says another? Data versus intuition. What are your thoughts?
Yeah. First, I'll go with the joke I say, in God we trust, all others bring data. But the reality is, you know, there's something to be said for intuition. And when they don't align, you got to do some initial dig in. But at some point, you know, if you have experienced people, you have to make a decision. What do you trust more? Because we've all had times where data has been wrong in people's gut, and there's the other. So, you know, most of the time you're going to align. You should trust the data, ideally. But there are times when you're going to go against the data, and that could be the right decision. We've all heard those stories. So I think it's, you know, hashing it out as a leadership, knowing when to just stop the analysis paralysis. Say, okay, we're going to give this 2 weeks, or we're going to give you 40 hours to dig into this. And then at that point, we just have to make a decision. So I think sometimes you have to put a line in the sand so you don't just keep spinning your wheels, and then make a decision on what you trust most. And in most cases, it should be data. If it's always intuition or gut, you have a problem. If it's 100% data, you probably have a little bit of a problem too, because the reality is sometimes gut is the way to go.
Certainly. Yeah, I've definitely gone against the data before, as I'm thinking back to a couple use cases, but that was normally when I suspected the data was not clean. And when the data is wrong, I will 100%, I won't even consider it half the time, because it's not worth distracting you from what's going on with the rest of the clean data, right? But other than that, I would say I'm pretty much just a data following guy for the most part. Other than that.
Yeah, and I agree. And I think most of the time that's what we should follow. There's always exceptions, whether it's gut, dirty data, or whatever. But if you're not following it most of the time, you need to ask yourself why.
Certainly. Well, we're wrapping up here, Paul. What's one thing you would leave us with before we call it for today?
Yeah. Start simple. This applies to financial models, dashboards, all these things. I really heard someone say, start simple because your business will make it complex. So when you're building that dashboard, focus on what's really important. Focus on making it simple, knowing that they're going to always ask for more things. And then you kind of have to decide, how do I add those? What makes sense? And, be willing to have those open, productive, positive conversations. It's okay to say, no, I don't think that makes sense here, but here are the alternatives, as long as you can support what you're doing. So really try to have those conversations to enhance what the business gets and to ultimately make sure you're providing something that will be impactful.
I think that's a great place to leave it. Paul, thank you so much as always. It's a pleasure having you. We will certainly have you back at some point, and then we will dive into something maybe even more modeling related and less dashboardy. But either way, we really appreciate all your time.
Yeah, pleasure to be here. And thank you, everybody. Really enjoyed chatting, and feel free to reach out. Reach out to Drivetrain, learn more about the great product they have, or feel free to reach out to me. And really appreciate everybody carving out some time today. It's always a pleasure to chat. Thanks, Kirk. We'll see you again soon.
Thanks, Paul.